Tonight we're going to talk about classical Rome. So remember that Rome rose after the height of Athens and Sparta. And what you see here depicted is a statue of the founding myth of the city of Rome. So the story goes that there were two brothers who were descendants of a famous Greek warrior from Troy and Nicias. So even in the myth, the founders of Rome were descendants of the Greeks. And these two warriors were sons of a woman and the god of Mars. So they were part god. And consider whose god was this? It was Greeks. And these two sons were called Romulus and Remus. And they were fighting over who would control Rome. And in the story, Romulus kills his brother Remus in order to take control of the city. So keep in mind the violence that goes into this founding story. It's depicted throughout the history of Rome. It started violently, and violence will continue throughout its existence. So some timing. Around the 8th century BCE was the Roman kingdom or monarchy. That's where the founding myth comes from. It's in 509 BCE that the Republic is founded, and it's a small city-state. It doesn't take up the entire area of Italy. It's simply the city-state of Rome. And so during this time, we had a fairly large group of aristocracy who said they were tired of listening to the king and decided to create a republic. So think of having a senate and having representatives make decisions for the people. Here we see the center of Rome. This is where all the market trading would take place, where the Senate would meet, etc. You can actually see these ruins in Rome today. It's called the Roman Forum. And so this area is in the center of Rome, and the ruins are still around. Notice that the architecture is very similar to our Greek architecture. And in 27 BCE, the Roman Empire is started. So this corresponds the start of the Roman Empire with the assassination of Julius Caesar. And it's under this empire that we have, as you see here, the Colosseum, what we think of Rome as, with our games and gladiators, etc. And the empire extends throughout the entire Mediterranean. The ending date of the empire is a little more complicated, and more on that later this week. So Rome you're going to need to locate on the map at the top of your notes. Put a dot and label it, but remember, look for the Italian high heel boot, and it's right at the knee. So you might identify Greece with all its islands, and it's to the left of Greece. It's the boot-kicking Sicily. Go ahead and label it. So first in Roman politics, we have the Roman monarchy that lasts from the 8th century BCE, so the 700s, to 509 BCE. It had created the religious and political center of Rome in the Forum, which is the picture you saw earlier. To the right, you see some Roman gold coins. Again, they're very similar to Greece's, but this is indicating that the Romans traded a great deal with other civilizations. The Roman monarchy was ruled by a leader, but in true form, it was ruled by aristocrats or nobility who threw out the monarch. So it was the aristocrats and the nobility who were doing most of the legwork with their leading, and the monarch simply had the name. So the aristocrats are in Roman times known as patricians, or land-owning males. It has that same prefix, the patri, so keep that in mind. So our patricians kick out the monarch and form the Roman Republic, and that lasts from 509 BC to 27 BCE. The picture at the top there, you see the Roman Senate gathering. All Roman citizens had the right to convene for assemblies, but this happened very infrequently. Most of the power was held with the Senate. So the first part of the Senate is the Senatus. This is the aristocracy that made the decisions. Then we have the councils, who are the two dual leaders who are elected by the Senate. And during a crisis, they actually chose a dictator. But the councils were always in place, and they would sort of be the regulators of the Senate and keep things in control. And so we had two in case there were two conflicting parties. Each would have a representative. The dictatus is the dictator that's chosen in the time of war or a crisis. However, most of the time the Romans avoided having a dictator. The past of their monarchy meant that they were very much opposed to having one single ruler. Keep this in mind when we talk about the assassination of Julius Caesar. The 12 tables, which were created in 450 BC, are the Roman law. And so when we talk about Roman law, we're going to speak of the 12 tables, such as similar to in Mesopotamia when we talk about law, we talk about Hammurabi's code. From 264 BCE to 146, we have the Punic Wars. So this is when Rome went to war with Carthage, one of their major trading partners. Remember that Carthage is in North Africa. Here you see a depiction of the War of Carthage at the right with the elephants. Carthage was actually 3 wars. One of the key leaders from the Carthage side was Hannibal, and it begins by Carthage attacking Rome and winning. Rome goes and attacks Carthage, and on the third battle, Rome wants to ensure that these wars are going to end, and so they pour salt over the crops in Carthage so that the fields become impotent or no longer able to bear fruit. More on the Republic. There are, at the end of the Republic, things get messy. There are a massive number of slaves in the Roman Empire and these slaves are actually taking jobs away from peasants. So there is a large amount of social unrest. The peasants are upset that there aren't enough jobs for them. The slaves are upset because of mistreatment. And so we have slave rebellions led by a famous slave, Spartacus. You might recognize the name Spartacus from the movie Gladiator. However, the depiction of Spartacus in that movie is not accurate. So also Julius Caesar is assassinated, and that is what ends the Roman Republic. So Caesar is a leader in the Senate. He is feared that he might become somewhat of an emperor, is taking over too much power. He's too popular. The other senators get upset, and so they decide to assassinate him. You might have heard the famous words "Et tu, Brute," which means "and you, Brutus." Brutus was a senator who was one of Caesar's closest friends and who actually struck the first blow against Caesar. So he was stabbed over and over again in the hall of the Senate. So in a Senate meeting, if you can imagine what kind of unrest and instability that shows and created, it was a big deal. So this picture at the right is depicting it. The brothers Gracchus were political players who tried to bring some logic back to and fairness back to the Roman Senate. However, they were unsuccessful. And the Civil War brings Julius Caesar to power. Again, he is seen as a threat to the other senators, that he may gain too much power and become an emperor or a dictator, and so we have the Ides of March. Caesar is warned that this assassination may occur, but he does not want to seem fearful, and he's not too fearful, so he goes to the Senate anyway and is assassinated. So the Ides of March are a time that is now superstitious, and they're the 15th of March. Despite all the efforts to avoid an empire and an emperor, the assassination of Julius Caesar leads to just that. So starting in 27 BC to a messy ending date, we have the Roman Empire. So the Roman Empire is started by Augustus Caesar, who is Julius Caesar's grandson. And so what the Roman Empire is best known for is massive, massive expansion. And this is done through conquest. So on the next slide, you're going to see a map of the very dramatic growth of the Roman Empire, from simply being a Roman city-state all the way to control of the majority of the Mediterranean. The empire is also well known for preserving what went well in other civilizations, with the Greeks, with the Egyptians, with the Syrians. They invented a few things, but not too many. Instead, they improved Greek technology, spread it, etc. There was still a large number of slaves, and as slaves simply work on the fields and are not educated, they do not result in a lot of inventions. It's when you have peasants who are self-educated, who are working in the fields, that we have agricultural inventions. But a large slave population usually means there's not a lot of new technology. The Roman Empire is a very violent time, especially at the end. In the last 100 years of the Roman Empire, you have 52 leaders switching in power, so that means almost every 2 years that a ruler is violently overthrown or murdered, so it's very unstable, especially at the end. But even when Rome is a little more stable and we have the Pax Romana, we have gladiatorial events and slave revolts, and so a lot of violence, fighting, etc. There were huge public works created by the Roman Empire. Think of the Roman Colosseum. There's roads that unite the entire empire. There are aqueducts, since Rome is not on a major body of water, so they create aqueducts that carry the water into the city, and many are still around today, and they're quite an engineering marvel. So the timeline, the Roman Empire begins with 27 BCE, with the Senate giving Octavian the name Augustus Caesar, and he takes over as the leader. And we're going to say, for lack of a better date, that the Roman Empire collapses in 476 CE. But again, more on that later this week. Here you see a map of Rome at the height of the empire. You see Rome includes the majority of, or all of Spain, all of France, all of Italy, all of Greece, all of what is today Turkey, Palestine, Syria, Egypt, and North Africa. So huge, huge control. Here you see the different regions are still labeled with their culture, because during the Roman Empire, especially starting under Augustus, these regions that were conquered were allowed to maintain their own religion, maintain their own language, and for all intents and purposes, not much changed, except they were then called Roman and had to follow any universally spread Roman laws and respect the Roman emperor as their leader. Switching now to social structures in Rome, we're going to look at religion, hierarchy, etc. So a reminder on timing, we have 8th century BCE is the Roman kingdom monarchy, then the Republic is founded, and it's a very small city-state, simply the size of Rome, and then from 27 BCE to around 476, we have the Roman Empire. So social structures in Rome, we have citizens, which include patricians, those male landowning people who are born in Rome. You have equites, you have plebeians. So plebeians are, you might have heard plebe in ROTC, but they are uneducated and basically the normal people. Equites are the religious figures, and plebeians are the peasants, the farmers, the merchants, the artisans, etc. Everyone who's not citizens includes foreigners, so those not born in Rome, slaves, and in general, Rome is very tolerant to other religions. Over the course of the Roman Empire, we're going to have Judaism, paganism, mythology, mystery cults, and at first Christianity is persecuted, but later Christianity will be accepted. So we have Roman mythology, which is very similar to Greek mythology. The only time religion became a problem was when it didn't reflect or respect the state above all else. So this is why Christianity at first was persecuted, because the Christians believed that Jesus and the church was more important than the government. But eventually Rome comes to terms with this. We have our gladiatorial games at our public works, so people would regularly meet at coliseums to watch battles, watch fights, watch people fight animals, slaves fight each other. Sometimes they would even fill the coliseum up with water and have military battles. To jump back to Roman mythology, we're going to look at some similarities between Roman and Greek mythology. Take a look at the Greek names and the Roman names. What do you notice? Go ahead and take notes. And what do you think could explain this similarity? Why does it exist? Go ahead and take notes. So Apollo is known as the god of music and intellectual pursuits, and sometimes the god of sun. Demeter and Ceres is the goddess of grain and harvest. Eros is the god of love. Artemis is the twin sister of Apollo. She's the goddess, she's a hunter, a virgin, and she helps with childbirth. Hera is the queen of the Greek gods and the wife of Zeus, the king, in Roman mythology. In Greek mythology, it's Athena. Poseidon is the god of the sea. Hermes is the messenger. Persephone is the daughter of Zeus, queen of the underworld, because Hades abducted her to get back at Zeus. And Aphrodite is the goddess of beauty, love, and sexuality, just to name a few. And then on the Roman side, you see their counterparts. Women in Rome have played pretty much the same role as in Athens. Their influence stays within the family, so they raise the children and oftentimes were in charge of educating their children, but outside the family sphere in economics and politics, women did not play a large role. Shifting to Roman economics, here you see a Roman coin because, as we discussed earlier, the Romans participated a great deal in trade. Here is that Roman Forum again. You can see the various buildings. This is where goods were traded, public speeches were made, political decisions were announced. It's sort of the symbol of the people collecting in Rome. Military parades would go through the city and end here. Emperors would build homages to themselves. So you see the Temple of Julius Caesar. And so it's where the Romans went about their daily lives, but also a very significant place for gathering. Here you see the growth of the Roman Republic throughout the empire and the republic and even into the monarchy. Rome is another agrarian civilization because they largely focus on architecture, but they have the similar problem with Greece, is that their land is not too fertile for grains and wheat, so they must trade. So one way to get around this, Rome conquered, and then they could force people to trade with them for very low cost. So they would almost take the goods, since they were now under the control of Rome, and then heavily tax the people. So if they purchased the goods, they would make that money back in taxes. Caesar, or a famous quote of Caesar, not Julius Caesar, but the Caesar, the ruler of the empire, is "Render unto Caesar what is Caesar's." Again here, you see the various regions. So even though everything conquered by the Roman Empire was considered property of the Roman Empire, you see a lot of autonomy, that France was allowed to keep its Gaulish heritage. Britannia was allowed to keep its British culture. Macedonia was allowed to keep the Greek culture, etc. You can see also on the map that Rome is a bit inland, so it's not on the coast. So Rome had to make coastal cities as port cities for ships to dock in order to trade. The most important of which was Ostia. It's only about 20 miles to the west of Rome along the Mediterranean Sea. Here is a restaurant in Ostia. This picture is inside one of the restaurants, and you can see the wall fresco. Think about what those images might be. If you came up with food, you're correct. So think about why, and it's because it's a menu. So think about why the menu is all in pictures. So you should have considered that Ostia is a key trading port city. So many of the people who come here do not speak Latin or the same language. And so just like the professor in the image is doing, people could point to the menu item they want and rather than having to communicate and get their desired fare. Here is another image of the restaurant in Ostia. You can see where the food could be cooked, how the food was displayed, etc. So again, it was very sophisticated. Major trends in Greece and Rome, this is an olive tree here, is that both Greece and Rome have poor soil for growing grains like wheat or barley, and so they farm only mostly grapes and olives. And the issue is, again, you can't survive on grapes and olives, so Rome and Greece both had to trade a great deal with North African regions and Middle Eastern regions in order to get the starch in their diet or the base of their diet. In order to do that trading, they had to develop a monetary system or a currency of coins that could be traded throughout the empire. So those coins are seen on the next slide. So major trends between Greece and Rome is that in the Middle East, now many people speak Greek because it made it easier to trade, and Alexander the Great conquered them and spread Hellenism. So of the lands Alexander the Great conquered, they became trading partners. So the region all in green became Greece's trading partners. The idea was you conquer them and then make them buy your goods, and you may buy the goods from them. So this happened in Greece with Alexander the Great. And the same thing we see here happens in Rome. So Rome conquers a large area of land and then forces these territories to trade with them. So we have a huge free trade zone. Keep in mind that both Greece and Rome don't have enough land or soil, proper soil, to support themselves agriculturally, so they're forced to go elsewhere to get their food, and this perhaps could explain the reasoning behind the large conquest that both civilizations underwent. Here again we have Cicero speaking in Latin. And he's saying we may indeed indulge in sport and jest, but in the same way as we enjoyed sleep and other relaxations, and only when we have satisfied the claims of our earnest, serious tasks. So think about what this means, but my hint would be the 7 habits. Have a great night. Come with questions for tomorrow. Thanks.